Alright, welcome back. So I'm going to set a big, hairy, audacious goal for this video and say by the end of this video, with a few games under your belt, your ELO rating will increase by 50 points. That's the goal I'm going to go for. Let's see if we hit it. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to cover one of the most common pawn structures in chess. We're going to learn how to play it from both sides, as white and as black. It's called the Carlsbad pawn structure. So especially if you're under 1400 ELO, even up to 16 to 1800 ELO, this is the pawn structure you want to master and be very comfortable in playing as both white and as black, because it happens in a hell of a lot of chess games. So let's get right into it. So firstly, this is the Carlsbad pawn structure, essentially where black has a c6 and a d5 pawn, and white has a d4 and an e3 pawn. And this arises, let me know if you can just pause it here, write in the comments if you think you know which openings this arises from. But essentially, this mostly arises from the Queen's Gambit, but it can arise from a few different openings as well, and I'll show you right here. So d4, d5, c4, e6, and then if we continue along normal lines, let's just say something like that, castle takes, so in the exchange variation, e3, c6, and we've got that Carlsbad pawn structure. Play will usually continue bishop d3, rook e8, castle, knight bd7, and we're going to pause right here because there's three main plans for white in this position, and we're going to cover those very quickly, as well as how black should respond in theory in the best practice way, and also what black's plan is. So white's first and foremost plan is a pawn push to b4 and b5, followed by exchanging on c6 and creating a weak backwards pawn over here on c6. So if I was to play it out, ignore any hanging pieces because black can instantly just take that here. If black just played random moves, white would continue with b5. Again, random moves, take, and then either land a knight onto that nice outpost in c5, or a combination of getting the rook here to apply pressure, getting the queen here to apply pressure to c6, possibly getting one rook on c1 and one rook on b1 and applying queenside pressure. That is essentially white's plan. On top of this, white's going to want to trade down pieces because as he gets closer to the endgame, there's more chance to go after this c6 pawn. And also, when the pieces are all traded off, or mostly traded off, the white king has a clear path into black's position via that c5 square or even a5. So in a nutshell, we've just gone from move 12 or 13 in a game all the way down into the end game. But let's just take a few steps back, and by a few steps I mean 40 moves. And let's just say, instead of b4, what are white's other plans in this position? Well, in these types of setups, and again, not in this exact position, although you can if you want, white also has the plan of getting the knight to e5, followed by pushing the pawn to f4. So if we just go play it out here very quickly on another board, playing a fake game here against ourselves just to play out the moves. Whoops, this should be here. Take, there, castle, and then, yeah, that's not a castle, that's a castle. So white's going to want to play knight e5 as the second plan, followed by f4, and then getting a kingside attack by queen f3 or rook f3, rook h3, getting a rook lift in there. Or if not that, then the third plan for white is to shuffle his pieces around and play for an f3 and e4 pawn break. So let's just look at these second two options first, and then we'll go back to the main option of b4, and then from there we'll look at how black responds. The reason why this isn't so popular is because it's called the Pillsbury attack type setup in the Queen's Gambit. The reason it's tricky to play in a lot of games is because you end up with these two squares being weak. So you get a weak pawn on e3, and you get a weak square on e4. So if black somehow gets a knight to e4 followed by kicking the knight out, he's got the open e-file. So white really has to watch out that black doesn't apply too much pressure on his position, and then black could really quickly, by playing moves like this, oops, put that back here, and g5, really build up a kingside attack pretty quickly. And the other way is if white played something like knight d2 followed by f3 in here. The problem with this is once you start trading, or even not trading, white ends up with a really weak pawn on d4 that he's got to be careful about at all times. It could always be met with something like a queen b6, putting pressure on the b2 square or pawn and that pawn here. On d4, followed by a well-timed rook d8, again just applying pressure to that pawn. And in this type of position, white would not want to trade pieces. White would want to continue attacking on the king side, oops, with something like e4 and opening lines for his pieces, because if white was to trade pieces in this position, white has this awkward pawn island in the center, which looks strong, but is actually a weakness because, again, black has that open e-file and an open d-file to go after those pawns. So white's got to be really careful. If he's going for this type of a setup, he needs to know, or she needs to know, that they're going to be successful in the attack. So therefore, by default, the b4 and b5 pawn break is the most logical for white, and this is the most common by far. And as black, you essentially want to play a6 at some point. And once white plays a5, you want to get into a situation where this is the resulting pawn structure, where you don't have that awkward weak pawn on a7. You've traded it off for that a2 pawn. And as black, now we get into how black is meant to play these positions. Black's pieces actually are pretty well coordinated on the king side and in the center. So while white starts playing moves like queen c2, rook c1, rook b1, maybe something like a knight d2, b3, c5, something like that, if he can't play knight e5, and white's essentially trying to attack these two squares, one to win that c6 pawn, and two to get his knight into a good position, and then start, whatever he wants to do, double up, get into black's position that way. Maybe even dropping that bishop back onto this diagonal so that black can't access that and challenge that b file with a rook on b8. That's essentially what white wants to do. His pieces are on the queen side. Black's pieces, however, are on the king side. So moves for black in this type of position are usually knight e4. Sometimes, if black has good protection on that square, in this case, white dominates that square. So black's going to want to play moves like h6 back and then knight g4. Get rid of these bishops. So exchange the bishops on e7. And once I've said oops like 10 times in this video. Let's keep rolling though. So once black gets rid of that pesky dark squared bishop of white's, black actually has a pretty easy time in starting to get his pieces into the game on the king side. So a move like f5 could be played at some point, followed by f4 and creating a weakness likewise, like how white did here, on e3. But if black does not want to weaken his king side, he can also just continue trying to get a knight onto that e4 square. possibly getting a bishop to e6 or even f5 if white starts moving his bishop. Keep doing this with the analysis board. If white gets his bishop off that diagonal, black might get a bishop on f5 after getting his queen to f6 to protect the bishop and that kind of stuff. So in a nutshell, black wants to center their play around kingside and center activity. Black does not really want to trade too many pieces in this type of a pawn structure because he's actually got the worst pawn structure of the two. White's got a clean single pawn island, great healthy pawn chain. Black has these weaknesses to contend to at all times. So the other option for black, let's just say, let's get rid of the knight, is to play play a c5 pawn break. So let's just say white's pieces aren't in the best position. Black can go for that c5 pawn break and end up with the isolated d5 pawn, but much healthier access to the game and to the e4 square with his knights, like so. And also just opening up his pieces. So the bishop will probably want to come to e6, or if not e6, then f5 is always an option, or a6. This rook can kind of quickly go to e6 and g6 or f6, go for a rook lift. While white's going to pretty naturally put a blockade with a knight on d4, black's going to dominate this e4 square. Black's going to probably get a queen to h4 or g5, a pawn on h5, h4, h3, and these are the moves that black would commonly play in this type of a position. Again, black will try to not trade pieces, because if he does, he ends up with the worst pawn structure in the endgame. And if, let's just say, if the pieces get traded off, let's just say knight for knight, knight for knight, rook for rook, queen for queen. That's not a queen, this is the queen. And then black, say, loses that d5 pawn. White will have good winning chances in the 4 versus 3 in this endgame. So, in a nutshell, that's the Carlsbad pawn structure. Those are the plans for both sides. And it really leads to a lot of interesting, slower positional type games, but it really helps you, once you get used to playing this pawn structure, this Carlsbad pawn structure, I'm pretty certain you can gain 50 elo points just by getting comfortable playing in this type of a position. So practice it in your games. I hope you take some of the lessons from here and apply them to your games. Let me know how you go, and peace out. See you in the next video. Good luck.